When I was 7 or 8 years old, I experienced a miracle on Christmas Eve. We had gone up to my Nana's third-floor apartment in her subsidized housing building to pick her up so we could all go to Mass together. And it was snowing out so hard you could barely see. And the whole family, I had 4 younger siblings, all tromped up to see my Nana and, see her Christmas tree and eat those sticky, hard ribbon candy things that old people always had. Since we were all crowded in her small space, I stepped up and looked out her north window to watch the swirling snow. And that's when I saw it, a glowing white cross floating in the dark. Not wanting to break the spell, I didn't tell anyone in my family. I just watched it glowing there in the swirling snow and heard it as a message from God that no matter what happened, we would get guidance in rough weather. I can still feel the wonder in my small heart. But at a subsequent visit, I happened to look out that window and noticed for the very first time that there was a church about a block away with a neon white cross at the top of its steeple. My miracle was explained. That cross and that church had been there the entire time I'd been visiting my Nana, but I'd never noticed it before. Have any of you had that experience? Have you ever noticed like a landmark when you're driving for the first time? Or maybe the door on the side of a building. And the paint looks old. Was that always there? We humans are great at living in a world that we expect to see, never questioning that there might be more. But there's even another level to it. The things we expect to see, can our expectations actually change the reality that we're living within? I loved Joel's reflection this morning, because it seems like in the 5th Solvay Conference in Physics in 1927, there was notable and very famous scientists from all around the world who came together to discuss this newly formulated quantum theory and the many problems that had yet to be worked out. Of the scientists gathered, 17 of the 29, including Marie Curie, who is going to win 2, all of the 17 won Nobel Prizes. So these were some really, really big thinkers there. And in the midst of all of that, the biggest story was the disagreement between Niels Bohr and Albert Einstein. Because Bohr asserted that subatomic particles didn't actually exist until someone looked at them. He said the act of observation caused existence. And Einstein pushed back, saying the reality was a fixed thing, and that even if we couldn't account for it, the particle was still there, somewhere. Bohr ultimately won the day, and he and Einstein continued a friendly debate for the following decades. Einstein insisting that reality is what it is, and Bohr saying, sometimes. And now, I had always thought of Einstein as the smartest person, the epitome of intelligence, and so I was really surprised when I stumbled upon this feud and learned that he didn't have the last word. Much of quantum science of the past century has based on Bohr's understanding of the interactive nature rather than Einstein's. But this doesn't have a lot to do with our everyday lives. Excuse me. I mean, it's not something we talk about every day, right? Maybe sometimes, our observations and our perceptions affect the way we understand the world, and they affect the way we experience reality. Back when I was in seminary, I was doing my clinical pastoral education in Elmhurst Hospital, and I noticed a strange thing. If I walked into a patient's room and Fox News was blaring away on the TV, they were almost always grumpier and more unhappy and complaining about their doctors and complaining about their kids and nothing, complaining about the world in general. But when I walked into rooms where the TV was turned off or there was something innocuous like Lassie on, there was more peace, even if the individual was struggling with some really hard issues. I would be greeted kindly and welcomed into their space. We'd have a nice chat. It wasn't every time, but it was enough that over that year I noticed it very strongly. And that was a long time ago. It was before we had these deep divisions in our society between the conservatives and liberals. That was back when it was just one TV show. What we pay attention to creates our experience. It's like one of those Escher paintings, you know, the ones with the stairways going up and down and all around, and the longer you look, the more conflicted you feel about what you're actually seeing. Which perspective is real? Are any of them? Now, there is a school of thought which says we totally create our own reality. Books like The Secret and religious movements, including Unity and Christian Scientism, and even to some extent our own transcendentalists, say that you could cure yourself of any illness by sheer mind power and determination. And I think there's a kernel of truth in there. But the flip side feels cruel, doesn't it? It says that someone died because they didn't have enough faith, or because they weren't strong enough. And I cannot accept that. Because I think there's always more to the story, more to life than can fit in any little finite box of explanation. Because while admiring that beautiful sunrise on the east, I might totally miss all of the storm clouds amassing on the west behind me. We live in a kind of scary time today, and there's a lot of anxiety going on. There's huge political divisions, there's mass disinformation, there's the threat of AI, and our climate changing before our very eyes. And there's that rise of authoritarianism that is happening all around the globe. There's so many storm clouds rising that it might feel simpler just to put our hands in the sand and ignore it all, or to grab hold of something that we believe is true and use it as a cudgel to beat the people around us, to prove that we have something we can hold on to. In fact, I think that's what authoritarianism is actually all about, finding somebody that can make it better. But what if there's a third way, or a fourth way, or a fifth way to look at this reality that we live within? What if the answer isn't finding the right way, because who the heck actually knows who that is, but finding the compassionate way, finding the generous way, finding the open-hearted and life-affirming way? What kind of world would you like to live within? Would it look like the one Allie Halpert sang about in She's on Her Way? I'd like that. But I don't think we can get there by doing the things we've always done. Einstein also famously said, "No problem can be solved from the level of consciousness that created it." We can't use the same tools and perspectives and mindsets which created this world to construct a different one. So, how do we counter the culture that we live within? Nigerian thought leader Bayo Komolafe is known for saying, "The times are urgent. Let us slow down." How countercultural is that? The times are urgent. Let us just breathe and slow down. Komolafe tells stories which turn the world on his head. He tells stories of people turning in crows and flying away. He talks about living in a world that is alive around us, where his ancestors would pour a little bit of wine on the ground before they took a drink to say thank you. It's about living in the world where everything is interactive. And while it might feel nonsensical to our modern brains, those stories can sometimes open us up and free us from the prisons that we don't even know we're in, from the water that is slowly beginning to bubble and boil around us that we never feel. And Komolafe does it with a sense of wonder and curiosity, and about how the world might look from a non-empire perspective, one which believes in magic, or at least rejects all the stories of what reality has to look like. It's like a Buddhist koan. Remember that one, the unanswerable question, what is the sound of one hand clapping? You don't ask that question to come up with an answer. You ask that question to break your mind out of how we always think about things. Maybe trees are the highest form of intelligence on the planet. Maybe snails. Maybe people can transform into crows and fly away. Maybe everything we know as fact is simply an arrangement of ideas which no longer serve us. Bohr was also famous for saying, "The opposite of a fact is a falsehood, but the opposite of a profound truth might well be another profound truth." Maybe reality is not what it seems, sometimes. Anyone here remember the fall of the Berlin Wall? That was back in 1989. For many of us at the time, it came completely out of the blue. A long, terrible division between people was suddenly gone. But was it really sudden? Teacher and thought leader Margaret Wheatley says that this was an example of the principle of emergence. Because in nature, when an ecosystem is threatened, small pockets of health will develop. Small pockets of animals and flora and fauna will grow and become very strong in that pocket, supporting one another. And then when something happens on the larger thing, all of those small pockets that developed separately will suddenly flip all at the same time. And the whole landscape will be transformed and will look like it happened overnight. But it was those pockets keeping life growing which actually let it happen to begin with. And in Germany, that's exactly what was happening. There were pockets of people who were holding on to a vision of a different world, holding on to a place of justice and of freedom. And each of those people not communicating with each other. Suddenly, something happened in the zeitgeist of the world, and all of that could overflow, and everything changed in a moment. That's really hopeful for me. Everything can change in a moment if we don't think things have to be what we have been told they are. Because it did not change from the top down. It changed from individuals refusing to go along with the status quo, with individuals forming pockets of health that said, this is how the world will be. Our beautiful song today was based on a quote from the book War Talk by Indian activist Arundhati Roy. And she writes, "Our strategy should not be to confront empire, but to lay siege to it, to deprive it of oxygen, to shame it, to mock it with our art and our music and our literature, our stubbornness, our joy, our brilliance, our sheer relentlessness, and our ability to tell our own stories." End quote. We can tell our own stories, stories that are different from the ones that we've been brainwashed to believe have to be true. The end of that quote is where she says, "Another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. The world is personified as a she, an emergent actor in the play we are all inhabiting." How do we tell different stories? Maybe they're simple stories about everyone belonging. Maybe they're stories of compassion and humility and interdependence. They're stories that affirm building gardens together and rejecting any hierarchies of worth. Stories which affirm the beautiful and the divine in every single being, not just the ones that have been elevated to celebrity status by their power or their wealth. As Unitarian Universalists, we pride ourselves on being countercultural, but sometimes I wonder if maybe we're just countercultural light. We still want to have all the promised good stuff of empire. The nice car, the big house, the cute clothes that we get really cheap because they're made on the other side of the world and we don't have to think about who's making them. I mean, that's me. I have lived within the paradigm of empire my entire life. And emerging from working class poverty, getting to that middle class, I felt like I finally arrived. I get to have this good stuff that everybody else has. Why shouldn't I? Why shouldn't I get the rewards of working hard? But when I truly open my eyes and look around, I see another reality. One where my comfort comes at the expense of other beings. one where my life is so disconnected from that interconnected web that I like to think about that I don't even feel it or recognize it most of the time. And where I doubt my own worth because I doubt the worth of other beings. Today, I'm encouraged by the words of Margaret Mead. You probably know them and have heard them many times. She wrote, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." In the past, I always heard that quote to say that one small group would grow and grow and get more and more people until it used the apparatus of empire to overcome and inject its will on the larger world, to win with its perspective, to win. Today I see it very differently. We don't have to win to change the world. We just have to be able to see and be differently. Because winning is living within the story of empire. Winning says there has to be somebody that comes on top, and that means somebody has to be on the bottom. What we can do is create our own pockets of love and connection and caring and non-hierarchical living. We can imagine a world that doesn't look anything like the experience of empire has told us. We can imagine a world that is totally different, so different that if we're quiet, we can hear it. We can hear her breathing. Another world is not only possible, it is ours here and now. We can hear her breathing, and she is us.